Hi everyone, my name is Jake Smeester and I am the Content Creative Specialist for Amazon Sumerian. And in this webinar, we're going to learn how to create a chatbot using Amazon Sumerian and a Sumerian host. So we're going to be walking through several different points, primarily looking at Sumerian. But we do want to go over a couple things that we're going to be discussing. First, we are going to have a very brief and short discussion on Sumerian and how it integrates with other AWS services. Then the more important part, we're going to look at the workshop, which is how to import a host. Then we're going to create a custom speech. Then we will learn how to implement a chatbot. Now, implement is something that's important. We will look at what that means here. So a note about our chatbot. We will be using a chatbot sample taken from the Amazon Lex console. So we're not going to be creating a new Lexbot or a new chatbot. That's something we're going to be pulling as from a sample that Lex provides. We will look at how to do that, but we're not going to start from scratch using our own custom chatbot. That's something that you can work on yourself when you're at home or another time. But from here, we're just more concerned about how do we pull in a Lexbot into Sumerian. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. One primary prerequisite, and this is important for really any time you're using Sumerian hosts, is to create a CloudFormation stack. And the most important part of that is that you get the Cognito Identity Pool ID that we will then plug into Sumerian. So if you follow this bit.ly link, this will take you to the CloudFormation stack that's specific for Lex using Sumerian. If you need more details on how to do that, you can check out the tutorial in the second bit.ly link. And if you just look at steps 1 and 2 for that tutorial, that'll walk you through how to do that. But it's a very simple process. It honestly just takes a couple minutes. So let's have a quick discussion and a short presentation on AWS integration and how it works with Sumerian. But let's look at what Sumerian is to begin with. Sumerian is an authoring tool to create AR, VR, and 3D applications. It is browser-based, and the best thing and one of the funnest things about it is it doesn't require any programming or 3D experience. It's not required for that. So depending on where you come from, nearly anybody and everybody can get started with Sumerian right away. And here are the Sumerian hosts that we're going to be looking at today and learning how to use today. Meet the Amazon Sumerian hosts: Christine, Luke, Preston, and Grace. Grace was recently introduced to the cast of Sumerian hosts just this last September. And one of the more popular features of Sumerian are the Sumerian hosts. Sumerian hosts are often used as guides for experiences. So as a virtual concierge or a tour guide of some kind, that's how a lot of customers are using and excited to use Sumerian hosts for. They are integrated with speech recognition services like Amazon Lex and Amazon Polly. And we can also add tracking and speaking and emotion animations for gestures and emotes directly into the SSML that is controlled by Amazon Polly. So we can get some really dynamic and lifelike animations with our characters. First, let's look at Amazon Polly. It's a text-to-speech service where users can type up a script and Polly plays back a spoken audio speech. Currently, Polly has 55 voices with over 27 different languages. It's low latency and allows for real-time systems, and developers can store and distribute generated speeches. Taking speech AI a little bit further is Amazon Lex, a service for creating chatbots, also known as Lexbots. It's based on intent-driven interactions where users can start the interaction with a goal or an intent they wish to complete. So in the example we'll be using today is ordering flowers. So the intent would be, as a user, I want to order flowers, and that's how we would start the interaction. And then between myself, the user, and the bot, we'd have prompts and slots where we could have a back and forth conversation on ordering flowers, and then we'd have the possibility to fulfill that intent at the very end. And it's also important to note that developers can use voice or text when they're using Amazon Lex. So now, after having a brief introduction and discussion about Sumerian and the AWS services involved to bring these Sumerian hosts to life, let's get to work and learn how to use Sumerian hosts. Now remember, like I said before, you can pull these. I'm just going to leave these up. I might refer to them here in just a bit again, as these are important parts to make sure that you have a working Sumerian host. So let's jump over to the AWS console. This is probably something that looks fairly familiar if you've used AWS before. So I have my recently visited services, and down here I have Amazon Sumerian. I also have it listed up here. And to get to Sumerian, all you got to do is click on this link here, and it jumps us right into the Sumerian dashboard. Now here is this is the dashboard. This has a list of all these different scenes that we have used in the past, and we also have templates down below. For example, in getting ready for this, I practiced this a few times, so I have Tech Talk Test 2 and Test, and every other service, or I'm sorry, every other scene that I've used before. Down at the bottom, though, we have a list of templates, or some available templates. We're going to be using the default lighting scene template. And this is important because this is going to already have some lights and a nice blue sky background to have a nice, well-lit scene that looks well with our hosts. So I'm going to start with the default lighting scene template, and I'm just going to call it Tech Talk Live. I misspelled it, and I will fix that in a second. All right, so I'm here in Sumerian. Now I did misspell that, so I can immediately jump over to this top tab here and change the name if I want, or I can just correct my spelling error. There we go. Okay, and the most important part is that we get the Cognito Identity Pool ID plugged in to our Sumerian scene. Now I'm going to show you briefly what this looks like. So if you follow that link I sent, all you need to do is just click I acknowledge and then create. So once I get that Cognito Identity Pool ID, I can jump back to the Sumerian console. And if I have my top tab, or my scene level entity selected over here in the Entities panel, if I navigate over the Inspector panel over here on the right, I can just insert my Cognito Identity Pool ID. And then we're set to go. Okay. Now let's take a brief view over, high-level view of the different parts or sections, panels of the Sumerian console, or the Sumerian editor. I'm going to increase the size of my screen a little bit. All right, and let me get rid of this. All right, so we have 4 different primary panels. The Entities panel has everything that is existing in our scene. So you can select different entities over here, and you notice that different things can be selected in the canvas. The canvas is the viewport to which we actually view the 3D objects in our scene. Now, depending on what we have selected, notice that the Inspector panel over here on the right changes. So if I have the top level tab or the scene level entity selected, you notice I have global level settings or scene level settings like the AWS configuration. If I select camera, then I have a camera component. If I select a light component, then I have a light component. So depending on what you have selected, it'll make a difference in what you see over here in the Inspector panel. Down below the Entities panel is the Assets panel. The difference between the Entities panel and the Assets panel is that the Entities panel shows things that are seen within your scene. The Assets panel holds everything that is involved in completing an object. So that includes all of the textures, all of the materials, all of the animations and skeletons and gestures and scripts and everything that is involved. So it's really a library containing everything within your scene. So we will use this briefly. So that is a quick high-level view of what Sumerian is. In this first part of the workshop, let's look at how to import a host. Going back over the Sumerian editor, what I'm going to do is select Import Assets up here above the canvas. Now, if you haven't logged in recently, some of this stuff may be a little bit new, as we have some new skyboxes available. But if I scroll down, I'll see the lists of hosts. And I'm going to select Grace Hoodie. This is Grace, our most recent host, and she's wearing a hoodie. So I'm going to select this host, click Add, and she will load and then populate down here in the Assets panel. And once I find her in the Assets panel, I'm going to look for this hexagon icon. That's the entity asset type. So once I can find that, and I can also filter down to the all entities, I can drag Grace onto my scene, and she will populate or appear here in the middle of our scene. And as you can see, she's also in the Entities panel. Okay, now that Grace has now populated herself in the middle of the scene, I can see her that she's down in the very center, below, in the middle of all these lights. And I can zoom in and out if I want, but if I want to quickly frame her in the middle of my canvas, I can just select the F key, And that'll frame her nice and squarely in the middle of our canvas. All right, so I have Grace here. She's in a nice T pose, staring straight ahead. And because I have her selected, notice that I have a few specific components that are specific to hosts. So the first is the host component. I'm going to select and expand the host component. Then under point of interest, I'm going to expand this property as well. Under point of interest, I currently have none. So that means when I press play, she's going to look blankly ahead and not stare and be staring at pretty much nothing. I want to change that. I want to make her stare at the default camera. So let me drag the default camera over into this target entity drop input. Let me expand that a little bit more so we can see it. And now, because her point of interest is set to the default camera, when I press play, when I start moving my camera around when I'm in play mode, notice that her point of interest follows the camera, what it feels like following me. So as I move around, notice her eyes are following, and then her head and neck follow as well. So that's a much more realistic and lifelike experience than having her stare straight ahead. I'll press stop and continue on. I will just fold up the point of interest because I'm not going to be needing to access that anymore. Animate using speech. There's a few different settings we want to talk about. First is lip sync and gestures. By default, these are selected, and we were going to keep it like that. Next is the gesture hold time. This is the maximum amount of time a gesture can be held. I'm going to reduce this down to 0.5. So that is 0.5 seconds. And the minimum gesture period, that's the time in between gestures. And it'll make a little more sense when we actually start creating a speech in which we're plugging in gesture tags. But this is the 0.1, or the minimum gesture period. This is the time in between gestures that is needed for new gestures to fire consecutively. So I'll leave it like that. 0.5 and 0.1 is okay. Then I will go ahead and collapse that. And then I'm good on the host component. Now, next, let's look at how to create a custom speech for our host. If I unfold the speech component, there's a few different settings here. We first want to notice that the voice selected is Sally. Now, don't be confused that the host herself is named Grace, but the voice is Sally. That's because these are Amazon Poly voices. So she's Grace, the host, using the voice of Sally. You can select any voice you want, and there are several different options, but I'm going to go ahead and stick with Sally. I'll leave the volume at 1. And now notice down here below the speech files that I have no files added to the speech component. So let's change that. Let's click the plus button to start adding a custom speech. Now over here, I'm now in the Sumerian text editor. This is a text editor that's used for editing speeches and scripts, HTML, a very simple, basic text editor, but it's connected directly into Sumerian, so making it a lot easier. I'm going to select next to the speech file. Let me do that one more time. There is a pencil icon. This is the global icon for editing. So I'm going to select that. Then go over and rename it intro speech, just to make it a little bit more obvious what this is. All right, now let's just type in something really basic. If you're following along, feel free to type whatever you want in here. But I'm going to say, hi there, AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. I'm going to go down another space. My name is Grace, and I am a Sumerian host. How can I help you today? Okay, simple speech. I'm going to click save. Notice it turns green now up here next to the intro speech tab. Go back to my editor, press play and see what happens. Okay, my scene is working. Grace is still following me, but she's not talking yet. And that's for a very good reason. So let's stop and look at why that is. So Grace currently has a speech, as you can see in her in her speech component, there is the intro speech. However, there's not a behavior telling Grace to actually start the speech itself or to start talking. To do that, we need to create a simple behavior using the state machine. And I will add component and then scroll down to state machine. I don't have any behaviors, so I'm going to press the plus button. And I will call this the speech and chat behavior. We're going to use the same behavior when we get to the chatbot portion. I'm going to have several different states involved in this behavior. And so what I like to do by default or best practice is to name each state the same as the action we attach to that state. But don't be confused that naming the state something doesn't actually add an action. We'll see how that works. So I'm going to first call this first state AWS SDK. And this is, again, a good best practice to add this action. I click Add Action down here. Then I'll search for AWS SDK ready. So this will initiate the AWS SDK whenever you're using a host. Again, best practice. Then I'm going to add another state. And also notice that this one, and this happened by default, is set as the initial state. So when I play my scene, this is the state that will start the behavior. Because I made this first, that happens automatically, but you can change it if you want, but we will not in this case. All right, let's go to our state 1 and rename it to wait. Because I don't want her to start talking too quickly. I want to give it just a little bit of buffer. I'm going to click add action and look for the wait action. I'm going to make it 1500 milliseconds. That's 1.5 seconds. I'm going to add one more state. And I'm going to call this one start speech. Then I'm going to add the action start speech. Now I'll select the start speech, and notice that next to speech there's a select speech drop-down menu. And if I hit that, there is my intro speech that I created just a minute ago. So I'm going to select that. If you don't select a speech here, there will not be a speech actually attached to this action. The last thing we need to do is add transitions to all these different states. And down here below at the bottom of the state, this is called the transition label. If you click here and drag over to the next state, then we get a transition. Didn't get one there. There we go. All right, so we have our transitions, or this is another thing we like to call this is just wiring it up. Okay, now that I've got it wired up successfully, I'm going to press play, zoom in a little bit first, and then press play. I'll leave the state machine open so we can see the behavior transitioning from state to state. Press play, see how this works.
Hi there AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. My name is Grace and I am a Sumerian host. How can I help you today?
Great, it worked exactly as we planned. So as you saw, what happened was it initiated the AWS SDK. It waited for 1.5 seconds, and then it started the speech. Okay, so we have a working speech. So she speaks through everything. The AWS SDK is set up. It waits for 1.5 seconds, then it starts the speech. However, notice that her gestures are not moving. She's not moving her hands or pointing at anybody. So the next thing we want to do is now add gestures to our speech. Let's return to our editor, our text editor. If it gets closed out, you can just find it under Tools here. Go to Text Editor. I'm going to open my intro speech, and you notice that there's no gestures, there's no SSOM markup. We're going to change that. Let's go back to the Sumerian. We're going to be going back and forth a little bit between the Sumerian console, the Sumerian editor, and the text editor. So let's select Grace Hoodie. Under Speech, what we're going to do is first add a gesture map. So we just need a library. This is just a library of gestures that we will be able to pull from. So we'll click the plus button. It'll take us automatically over to the text editor. And here's the gesture map. We'll look at what this is in just a minute. Let's go back to the Sumerian editor. And next to our intro speech is this auto-generate gesture marks portion. I'm going to click this. And nothing happens right here in Sumerian. That's because it happens in the text editor. So let's go back again to the text editor. Now notice that my intro speech is now marked up with SSML. I'm going to break this up to make it a little easier to see. Just go sentence by sentence or line by line. Okay. Now, what happened here is that if we go over to the default gesture map, it looked for words like my, I, myself, self, I've, and so forth. And anytime it found one of those words, it added self. Similarly, with hello, hi, hiya, howdy, and so forth, it then adds the wave gesture. So if we look at this intro speech, so it says hi and welcome, both which added a wave gesture tag. I don't need 2 of those wave gesture tags in a row, so I'll delete one of them. And then when it looked for the word my, or it saw the word my, and then added the self gesture tag. And then I have another self gesture tag down here. I'm going to delete that one. We just don't need so many repeating gestures. Okay, I'm going to click save. But if you notice, though, when we were walking through this or listened through it the first time, she really sped quickly from one sentence to the next. If we want to break this up and make it feel a little bit more natural, it makes sense to add some break tags into our speech. I'm just going to do that manually here. Just go break time. Oops, that wasn't correct. Oh, man. Break time equals 250 milliseconds. And then that's really 1/4 of a second there. I'm going to copy and then paste that one down here, but I'm going to make it a little bit longer for this break time. I'll make it 1 second long. And there we go. Clean it up just to make it look a little easier. All right, I'll click save. Go back to the Sumerian console. Press play and see what happens.
Hi there, AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. My name is Grace and I am a Sumerian host. How can I help you today?
Okay, so there's a couple things we need to fix. I'll press stop. And let's see, there is something in here. So I had this gesture tag back here. And really what we want to do is pull this. My name is Grace and I'm a Sumerian host up there. How can I help you today? We'll keep that right there. And because I have tested this, what I do know is that I need to, let me back that up. This self gesture tag, I need to put it right actually after the word my. Just to save on time. We won't test that right now. It's because this wave tag just goes a little bit too long, and so we need to push it back just by 1 word so we can actually let this self gesture tag fire. Okay, so let's save it again. Let's make sure that we got everything right. Okay, so we have the wave. Hi there, AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. Then it breaks for 1/4 second. My, and then the self gesture tag. Name is Grace and I'm a Sumerian host. Breaks for 1 second. How can I help you? And with a you gesture tag. Today, how can I help you today? All right, so let's return to the Sumerian console or the Sumerian editor, press play, and see what happens.
Hi there, AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. My name is Grace and I am a Sumerian host. How can I help you today?
Okay, good. So it fired all 3 of our gesture tags. She waved, she pointed at herself, and then when she said, how can I help you today, she pointed at you, the camera. All right, so good. We have our speech, we have our gestures. Now the last thing we need to do is add in our Q&A part or our chat portion of the chatbot or of the workshop. So let's return to our slides and look at the next portion, which is implementing a chatbot. Again, we're going to be pulling from Amazon Lex. I will show you how to do that, just give you a quick run through of how that works. Let's first click on Amazon Lex. That takes you into your Amazon Lex console. If you have any chatbots already built, then you will see them here. If you want to create something from scratch or create a new sample, you use a sample, click the Create button. You can create a custom bot, you can book a trip, order flowers, or schedule an appointment. These 3 are all samples provided by and built by Amazon Lex. I went ahead and I clicked before on the order flowers, and then I built it and published it. I will go back and show you a little bit of what that looks like. I can find it down here under order flowers. And here's the intent and the utterances to get this all working and the chatbot up and running. Now notice the name of the bot is order flowers. If I go to settings, I can name an alias, since that's basically like a version type of the bot. Then I clicked build and publish. And that published my bot. And the two things that I need to pull from Amazon Lex into Amazon Sumerian is the Tech Talk alias name, really, and then order flowers. So those are the two pieces we need inside Sumerian. But you do have to make sure that you push build and then publish for your bot. All right? So again, we are not creating a custom bot. We are just using a sample that is provided by Lex. Okay, jumping back over here to our Sumerian editor, I need to add a component, and I need to add the dialog component. Notice right away that it's prompting me for the name and alias. So we will do order flowers, and the alias is Tech Talk. It is case sensitive, so make sure that you get all that correct. Okay, and once that's in there, we are good to go. We're just going to click back into our behavior and start adding on to what we've already built so far. I'm going to go ahead and hide the entities and assets panel because we don't need that. Now what's going to happen here, it's going to wait, it's going to play our speech just like it did before, and then it's going to be wanting to transition to a new state. And so let's look at how to do that. We need to add another state, and the first thing we want to, or what we want to call it is wait for spacebar, or just wait for space, that's fine. I'll click action, and I'm going to click the key down action. And over here in the inspector panel, I'm going to change the key from A to space bar. Okay, and the workflow is going to be very similar here for all these different states. We're going to create a state, add a state. We're going to rename the state and then add some sort of action. So that's what we're going to do for the next couple minutes. I'm going to click add state again, move it over. We'll call this one start recording. And that will be actually recording. Well, we'll look at it in a second. We'll click add action. And we'll search for the start microphone recording. So this will actually be recording something on your computer's microphone. Click add action. And this time we're looking for key up. I'll explain this workflow in just a moment. We'll change the key from A again to space. We're going to add another state. We'll call this next state stop recording. Then let's just talk about what this is happening, or what's going on here. So after the start speech and it plays the speech, it will go to wait for space. So it'll be waiting for us to click or hold down the space bar. Once we do, it'll transition to the start recording. It will start recording and recording anything that we say. And then it'll transition to this state, and then it'll stop recording right after we lift up this space bar. But now we need to do something with the recording. So let's add another state. And we will add, or call this one process with Lex. And then, did not mean to actually make that set as initial state, so don't do that. Go back to process with Lex, add action, and we will look for send audio input to dialog bot. That's really the same thing as processing with Lex. So I'll leave it as that. Then we need one more state. And just like the last start speech, we're just going to go start speech, add action. We'll search for the same thing, start speech. But instead of selecting a speech like we did last time, we're going to click the Use Lex Response checkbox. So let's talk about this workflow here, or what's happening within this behavior. After the speech ends, I'm just going to be adding transitions while we go. It'll transition to wait for space, where we'll be waiting for us to hold the spacebar down or until the spacebar goes down. Once it does go down, it'll start recording, and as soon as we let up the spacebar, it'll transition to this state, and it'll stop recording. As soon as it is stopped recording, it'll then send that recording to the dialog component or processing with Lex. And then we're going to pull from this top transition label here, on response ready. And then it'll transition next to the start speech, of which it's clicked to use the Lex response. So then it'll actually just use the response that's in our chatbot. After that, we want to continue. There's several back and forth portions of this conversation tree, so we don't want to just end it there. We want to be able to continue the conversation with our chatbot. So then we're going to keep going back, or transition back to the wait for spacebar. So now we have a much larger state machine behavior that plays a regular speech and then moves on to the chatbot using Lex. All right, so let's play this, and using the prompts and responses that is built within Lex, we're going to see how this works. We'll press play.
Hi there, AWS Tech Talk attendees. Welcome to Jake's webinar. My name is Grace and I am a Sumerian host. How can I help you today?
Okay, so it's waiting for me to click the spacebar, and so that's what I'm going to be using to move between these actions or these states. I would like to order some flowers.
What type of flowers would you like to order?
Tulips.
What day do you want the tulips to be picked up?
Friday.
Pick up the tulips at what time on November 9th, 2018?
10 a.m.
Okay, your tulips will be ready for pickup by 10 o'clock on November 9th, 2018. Does this sound okay?
No.
Okay, I will not place your order.
Right, so that really ends the Lexbot right there. I could continue the fulfillment and then actually queue it up using the right logic to actually place that order if I want within Lex. But we're not going to do that right now. We've completed the Lexbot. I do want to note what would happen if you don't say the right utterance or the right prompts. So let's just try that real quickly. What's your favorite color?
I didn't understand you. What would you like to do?
Who are you?
I didn't understand you. What would you like to do?
So again, if you say things that doesn't make sense to this for this particular chatbot, or this particular bot, then it will spit back that type of response. Like I don't understand what you're saying. And so that primarily concludes this portion of the workshop: how to implement a chatbot using Amazon Sumerian and Amazon Lex. I do want to note that we have several resources that are available to you that can help you get started with all of this. So notably, we have all the documentation, that is the tutorials, and then also our user guide and our FAQs. We also have a lot of videos on our own YouTube channel, our Amazon Sumerian YouTube channel. So there's beginners courses, there's tutorials, our Twitch episodes are all can be found there. And then we also have a really flourishing our Slack Sumerian community. And if you go there, there's lots of users, there's lots of people interacting with one another and answering questions for one another. So we have a really great community of people that's constantly growing. So we encourage you to join and get involved there and see what people are doing. And lastly, like I already mentioned, we have a weekly Twitch stream that for the AWS on the AWS channel that you can find there, and they will also be listed on YouTube. So make sure you check out our different resources to continue learning how to build more things and connect more services using Amazon Sumerian.